हेलो, गुड इवनिंग। 11th गिरीश संत मेमोरियल इवेंट में आप सभी का मैं प्रशांत देशपांडे हार्दिक हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूं और आज के प्रोग्राम के विस्तार से जानकारी देता हूं। आज का प्रोग्राम गिरीश संत मेमोरियल एक्टिविटी के बारे में आपको पहले नरेंद्र पई विस्तार से बताएंगे। उसके बाद श्री हरि दुक्कीपति प्रेजेंटेशन इंट्रोडक्शन ऑफ डिस्कसिंग टॉपिक के बारे में बताएंगे। उसके बाद नरेंद्र श्री कुमार जी पैनल सेशन टॉपिक्स एंड पैनलिस्ट का इंट्रोड्यूस करेंगे। उसके और पैनलिस्ट का क्वेश्चन आंसर के बारे में आपको बताएंगे। उसके बाद एक अनाउंसमेंट अभी अभी आई है, वो आपको बताना चाहता हूँ कि हमारा प्रयास हेल्थ ग्रुप बच्चों का HIV के लिए जो बहुत साल से काम कर रहे हैं उसके लिए उनको एक अवार्ड अभी मिल जा रहा है। वो अवार्ड का नाम है कर्मयोगिनी विजयताई लवाड़े अभी लवाटे अभी हमको एक खबर मिली है, उसके लिए एक जोरदार तालियां होना चाहिए। इसके बाद प्रोग्राम के अंत में हमारे विजया जोरी जी वोट ऑफ थैंक्स करेंगे। इसी के साथ मैं आपसे विदा लेता हूँ और आगे नरेंद्र जी को हैंड ओवर करता हूँ। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Prashant. Good evening, everyone. I am Narendra Pai from Prayas Energy Group. I extend a warm welcome to all to this event held in the memory of Girish Sant, the founder coordinator of Prayas Energy Group. Unlike most of you gathered here, I have not had the good fortune of knowing Girish personally. Yet his memory is kept alive by colleagues at Prayas and friends of Girish through conversations and anecdotes shared by people who knew Girish the person and his commitment to public interest work in energy. Girish has positively impacted many like me. This is what Prayas, along with the support of friends and well-wishers of Girish Sant, have strived to achieve through Girish Sant memorial activities every year for the past 11 years. The Girish Sant memorial activities is made possible by the guidance of generous contribution of 25 friends and well-wishers of Girish, under which two main activities are held. The first is a Girish Sant memorial event, of which this is the 11th edition. Second is the Girish Sant Young Researcher Fellowship. Between 2013 and 2015, the Girish Sant Memorial event consisted of eminent public intellectuals and practitioners giving address on various topics of public interest, sharing their valuable lessons from their rich and varied experience. Thereafter, we have moved to a panel discussion format with distinguished members from civil society and governments, sharing their insights on topics moderated by members of Prayas. And last but not the least, we have had an engaged audience during these events who enriched the discussions through thoughtful questions and comments. Since the past 2 years, we have been able to enable audience to join the live program remotely and benefit from the rich insights of the discussions as they unfold. We have also enabled live audience to ask their questions to the panels. The second activity of Girish Sant Memorial activities is the Girish Sant Young Researcher Fellowship, which is awarded to early career, public-spirited and promising individuals to undertake public-centric research in energy. Thus far, we have had 5 Girish Sant Memorial Fellows whose work under the fellowship can be accessed from the website. And the call for proposals is communicated through our website and social media handles as and when the fellowship is offered. And with that, I would like to hand it to my colleague Srihari Dukkipati, who will introduce the panel discussion topic of today's event. And once again, a very warm welcome to all. Over to you, Srihari.
Good evening, everyone, and good to everyone in the auditorium, and as well as over 50 people as I hear on the Zoom meeting. I am Srihari Dukkipati, and with Prayas Energy Group, and I will be introducing the topic of today's panel discussion in about 10-15 minutes. How do we define an energy transition? In simple terms, it is a significant shift in energy demand, supply, and management. And energy transitions are also not new. They have been happening over the years. This is an example of a chart from a developed country for which data is available over the last 200 years. In the 19th century, at the beginning of the 19th century, firewood played a big role in supplying the energy needs, as well as, of course, human and animal power. By the end of the 19th century, coal had basically started playing a much bigger role in the energy sector, going by the share of energy from coal in the whole energy basket. In the 20th century, with the advent of automobiles and also more oil and gas exploration happening, oil and gas started playing an important role, such that by the end of the 20th century, a significant portion of the energy supply comes from oil and gas. And we see that primary electricity, which is essentially direct electricity, not from fossil fuels, has started picking up towards the second half of the 20th century. Energy transitions are also associated with increase in energy demand. This is a chart that shows world per capita energy consumption over the years, over the same around 200 years. And per capita demand, as can be seen, is growing rapidly over the years, has grown rapidly over the years. And so there is a view that these are not necessarily transitions, but actually energy additions. That is, ever increasing demand for energy being met through newer sources of energy. In our times, in the current transition, what is the current what does it involve? It's primarily a transition from fossil fuel in the energy sector. It is primarily a transition from fossil fuel based supply to low carbon energy sources. And it is also characterized by an increasing role for electricity in the energy supply. This is a chart that shows the end-use energy consumption in India over the last 30 years. In 1990, the share of electricity in the final energy consumption in the country was about 10%, and that has grown to about 20% by the end of by 2020. And this is expected to significantly grow in the next couple of decades, and mainly aided by fast electrification of various sectors, including transport, perhaps cooking, and process heat for industries as well. With increasing renewable energy sources in the electric grid, there is because of that, there is an increased variability in energy generation, and this is an important aspect of the transition from the fact that this variability needs to be balanced by conventional energy sources or other energy generation sources or other storage sources, and there are costs associated with that, and hence there is an impact of that on the electricity system. The transition is also characterized by unequal impacts on people at different locations, and this is true globally as well, but it is also quite true in India. For example, coal resources are concentrated more in the center and the east, whereas wind and solar resources are available more in the north, west, and south. This has implications for employment, perhaps migration, state revenues, and also the environment. So what are the drivers of this energy transition? As mentioned earlier, one of the drivers is, of course, increasing demand. So newer sources of energy are being explored. Breakthroughs in technology and cost of solar and wind based electricity in the last decade has made these cleaner sources more viable, and solar is expected to also follow a similar trend in both technological advances as well as cost reductions. This has happened in the context of increasing need to swiftly address both local pollution impacts as well as global climate change impacts of conventional sources. In fact, one thing that is different in this transition as opposed to the past transitions is the increasing climate urgency that is forcing the pace of the transition. And hence, we see that government policies are increasingly playing an important role in terms of making the transition happen and forcing it in a certain direction. The modular and decentralized nature of solar, wind, and storage sources, along with their cost reductions, is also leading to new business models. People are moving away from the consumers are moving away from the electric utilities to captive and open access routes. This is resulting in new business models along with technologies that enable these models. Now, what do we mean when we say that we need to prepare for a people-centric energy transition? While the transition is happening, there is also need to ensure that it is centered around people. There are, of course, pulls and pushes in different directions. And in this context, particularly in the context of this overwhelming push to decarbonize, it is important to ensure that public interest is strengthened and to ensure that a fair transition happens. And this needs a comprehensive approach. People-centric thinking should not be an afterthought. Instead, it should be the key objective of the transition. And there are several long-standing issues in the energy sector, and these issues, this is an opportunity. The transition is an opportunity to also address these issues as part of the transition. Now, a comprehensive view also perhaps requires a framework of how we want to make the energy transition a fair transition. So what would such a transition look like? Countries such as India, of course, have low per capita consumption levels, and hence energy demand is likely to grow in the coming years in order to achieve the developmental goals. And energy services are a means to improve well-being and livelihood, and hence they are a central part of everything we do in the energy sector. Technologies that are deployed, deployed to meet these energy service needs give rise to demand for energy, and the demand is met through optimal sources of supply, hopefully optimal sources of supply, and hence everything. When we talk about the energy transition, it is very important to keep in mind that it is the energy services that are to be met, and not that certain gigawatts of capacity needs to come online. Of course, that will derive from the need for to meet these service demands, but that shouldn't be the starting point. And hence, an understanding of energy service needs is important, and while doing that, it is also necessary to distinguish what are essential needs and what is excessive consumption. And we need to discourage excessive consumption as well. And so the idea is to maximize well-being while also minimizing the environmental impacts. While excessive consumption should be avoided, we also need to simultaneously improve overall energy as well as resource efficiency, along with material efficiency. So need for fewer materials, especially virgin materials, results in lesser demand for energy, and hence and also lesser mining. So overall, it results in better environmental sort of stewardship. we need to pay attention to negative impacts of energy projects on both legacy as well as new energy projects, to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not being repeated again. And for all of this to happen, we need robust institutional practices, such that energy governance is democratized through better transparency and accountability, and there is greater public participation in the decision making of the sector. All this needs, of course, capacity building, not only of the public but also of the government and other stakeholders. Now, moving to a better energy system involves solutions that span multiple sectors. And there have been various paradigms that have been proposed across various sectors. For example, there is the avoid, shift, improve paradigm in the transport sector. There is also low external input, sustainable agriculture practices, and so on. We will hear more about this from our panelists during the panel discussion. But for now, we would like to just focus on the what this means to the electricity sector and what such a paradigm would look like in the electricity sector. So there is this reduce, improve, replace paradigm in the electricity sector, which rests on three pillars. The first pillar is basically to reduce inequity of supply, affordability, and also to reduce excessive consumption. The second is to improve both energy as well as resource efficiency, and also to improve governance to ensure that the sector is people centered around people. And finally, we need to replace fossil fuels with cleaner energy sources, and simultaneously mitigating uneven impacts on people, thus bringing about both intragenerational and intergenerational justice. Given this paradigm, we would like to take a look at some of the examples that in the electricity sector. First, and some of these are based on the work that we have done at Prayas. So some of these are already underway, but of course they need greater attention. To begin with, as already indicated, we need a better understanding of our energy service needs. India will certainly need to consume more energy per capita to meet her developmental goals. But how much energy we need is a question that needs greater exploration. We also had a discussion about this in one of our past panels as well. We cannot use per capita consumption in developed countries as a guide, as they have taken a path of excessive consumption. So instead, we need to better understand what are our energy service needs and meet them in the most optimal manner, both socially and environmentally. Hence, we need to focus on affordable quality supply for all consumers in order to meet, help improve well-being and livelihoods of the underprivileged, but which will also have a positive multiplier effect on the rest of the economy. Space cooling needs are expected to increase manyfold in the coming years, and use of environmentally benign and energy efficient materials to construct our buildings and to design them such with proper ventilation, etc., will reduce the need for energy intensive sort of appliances like air conditioners, notwithstanding of course the auditorium we are in. Simultaneously, there is a need to increase appliance efficiency as well. And solarizing electricity demand for agriculture through tail-end small and medium-sized solar plants will ensure that farmers get daytime supply. There is a reduction in transmission and distribution losses. Demand is shifted to times when solar generation is abundant, and the burden on the public exchequer is also minimized. The subsidy burden, I mean. And the modular nature of solar and storage options means that decentralized energy systems can play a larger role in our supply system. We can start with solutions that are available today, such as providing reliable electricity supply for public health system, public health clinics, schools, and other public infrastructure. And over time, if one is allowed to dream, in the long run, we could eventually graduate to community-owned energy systems, aided by a robust, of course, a robust centralized electricity grid is needed. Of course, this can only happen when the conditions are suitable, and several other changes need to happen in the economy or in the governance before this can happen. This can go hand in hand with decentralized governance and strengthening of local self-government, accompanied by greater financial outlays and associated capacity building programs. And finally, and equally importantly, we need better social and environmental stewardship, governance of all our supply options, including renewable energy. As mentioned, we need to address the environmental issues of both the legacy systems as well as those that are likely to come up with newer systems, such as renewable projects or even transmission. In addition, specifically in the context of the transition, closure of coal mines and thermal generation projects, we need to ensure that those happen in a just manner, both for people who are working in those facilities as well as the communities that are around these projects. None of this is easy to do. But such efforts can play a big role in moving us into this environmentally safe and socially just space where humanity can thrive. With this, the introduction of the topic, I would like to invite the panelists onto stage: Ashwini Kulkarni, Geetam Tiwari, and Kanchi Kohli. And I request Sri Kumar, who is the moderator for today's discussion, to take it forward from now.
Okay, you can hear me? Yes. I will not, waste any time. I am Sri Kumar from Prayas Energy Group. I have been with the group for around 20 years. Srihari's presentation has shown that energy transition is not new; it's an ongoing transition. But the whole effort is to see how to change it. So I will just tell a brief introduction, before the panel starts. What are we trying to discuss today in the next, say 1 hour or so? So if I want to start discussing that, I'll take one step back and say that I would like to take the image of a moving bus, which is taking people away from, let's say, the big earthquake that happened, where 24,000 people or more people have died. So there is a bus taking all the people away. So a lot of people have got into the bus, and a lot of people have not been able to get into the bus, and the bus is going somewhere. It's taking some route. It is going at some speed, and we are all passengers in that bus, but we are not. The driver is driving it. We really don't know where it is going. So energy transition is, such a bus where some people are there and some people are not even, there in that bus. So our idea is that as passengers, can we just pause for a while and just think, where do we want to go, how do we want to go, what route we want to go, what speed we want to go, and how to also get the other people into our bus. So that's what we want to try, and that's what we want to try in today evening for next 1 hour through a discussion in this panel. And what is the panel consists of people with different areas of expertise. Somebody is from transport, somebody is from environmental governance, somebody works in rural area. But what is common is, I think, this whatever they agree with what Srihari said, that we want to really see how this energy transition bus can take all the people and go in the right direction at the right speed in the right route. That's what is common among all of us. So with this, let me just introduce briefly the panelists. I'll just start with Ashwini Kulkarni. She works with Pragati Abhiyan in Nasik. She works on almost all rural issues, whether it is livelihood, agriculture, health, government programs, public distribution system, or employment guarantee. And as a person, I have always seen, she's an old friend of Prayas. Many people in Pune know her, a person full of energy and positive, even after working at one level with the community and at other level with governments of all kinds and researchers of all kinds. That is something that always I have not been able to do. So that is Ashwini Kulkarni. Geetam Tiwari, who is sitting next to me. She is a professor at IIT Delhi. She heads the Transportation Research and Injury Prevention Center, which works on transportation. And I have actually met her only recently, but some of my friends know. And what has impressed me is that she's an academic who is able to talk simple language in which I can understand, and many other people, common people, can understand, which is a rare skill. I have not many people like that. The moment I meet a professor and the professor starts speaking, I am lost. Kanchi Kohli, she is a researcher in environmental law and policy at Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. She's all the three people have Pune connections. So does Kanchi. She is associated with Kalpavridge for a long time. Whatever I know about her and looked at her talks and articles, she's an environmental justice crusader. So she works, she understands the environmental laws and governance, and she tries to empower the community to use them so that their own issues are met. That is the kind of work that she does. So I am very happy. Thanks, for coming so readily and being with us. So the way we want to do this panel discussion is that we'll have 3 rounds, let me say. In the beginning of the first round, I will ask a question and you can respond. And at the end of it, I will briefly summarize, and we'll have a second round. And after these 2 rounds, which will last for, I think we can still afford to do around a little less than an hour, we'll have a question answer session. And as was announced by, earlier, please send the question answers through the volunteers, and the people on online, please send it on the chat box. Then we'll have a question answer session, and after that we will have a very fast concluding round. That's how we'll proceed. Now I will just introduce the first round, what I would like all of you to do. First thing, maybe you could spend, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes to tell a little bit more on the spread of activities that you do, because I don't think I understand all the things you do. I think it will be useful to the audience to understand, what are the areas you do, and preferably choose areas which are related to transition, because that's the topic of discussion today. The second thing is that what is the transition that you are seeing around you in your area of work? What is happening around you which is it is related to transition? And in this round, don't be judgmental. Just let us hear what it is, and without judging whether it's good or bad or it could be better. Just let us know what is happening. But at the end of it, I would like to choose maybe just one item or maximum 2 items, which you have let's say solid experience, and there are problems and you want to improve it. Just 1 or 2. Why I am asking you this is that in the second round, I am going to ask how you can improve it, so that we will have a discussion on that. And I'm hoping that this way we will be able to capture some common elements which are of use to everybody. And I would each of you have around 5-6 minutes to do. So I will start with Kanchi with this question. What is just briefly introduce the kind of work you do and what's the kind of transition you see around you.
Firstly, it's an absolute privilege to be here as a young researcher trying to dabble even with the idea of what is understood as environment. I think Prayas and Girish Sant was a huge guiding light as young researchers for all of us. So I think I want to acknowledge that. It's an absolute privilege to be here. Even though you introduced me as a law and governance person, I actually come from social sciences and social work background, and environment was an idea which was something I only experienced. So it was the I come to environment ecology not from the side of natural sciences. I come from the social work, social sciences side. So a lot of my observations of how nature and people interact is basically that interface. And I think law became, law and governance issues became an area of research for me, basically because it was extremely crucial for the places one was working in. To understand how arrangements, natural resource arrangements are made, why are people able to do what they are able to do, why not, which institutions to interact with. As a researcher, one had to really map that out. And I think that question remains for me even when you ask about the energy transition. In some ways, the presentation that we saw and all the debate on energy transition is about, it is also coming, it's a combination of a global commitment for countries like India, and it is also a thing about, so even when we've made a commitment to the idea of energy transition, it has to be operationalized, and it has to be operationalized through policies, projects and regulatory frameworks. And when that happens, it's only through that arrangement that we are looking at getting to that net zero good level or the pure level that we've defined for ourselves. So the idea of energy transition is set. Now the challenge, or what we actually see happening, is that when you are trying to translate these policies, regulations and projects into real situations, it is specific projects that we need to look at, in these spaces, and these projects could be, say, how do you operationalize renewable energy, how do you reduce fossil fuel use, how do you create mitigation measures, offset mechanisms, plantations, or for that matter, how do you encourage clean energy, what is seen as clean energy projects, waste to energy, hydro, these are considered to be clean energy projects. Now finally they are all projectized, and these projects are not implemented in empty spaces. So that's where the challenge is really coming up. The idea of energy transition has to acknowledge that once you roll things out, energy transition has to be grounded. And when the rubber hits the ground, that's where all these questions are, the social, ecological questions are really coming up. Now, what is assisting in many ways the energy transition is regulatory subsidies. We all often know about regulatory subsidies around finance, which kind of projects need to be implemented, what kind of designs have to be. So renewable energy actually gets, solar and wind gets encouragements. Technology, what technology should be deployed. Also what is subsidized, say in state action plans, is about how do you expedite access to land or water, etc. But alongside what is happening is the regulatory subsidies are also in the form of reduced environmental scrutiny. So in some ways if you see that also as a subsidy that is being offered to projects, that okay, openly we've acknowledged that this is a good idea, energy transition is a good idea, anything that needs to be operationalized for energy transition is also good. So for something that is a good project, you might as well reduce or you subsidize it. So a lot of the regulatory changes in, say, environmental approvals, environmental assessments, public participation is justified by saying there's already a legitimacy for the idea of energy transition and all that comes with the energy transition. Now that's a contradiction with what I was saying earlier in terms of where it operates. For that local situation, for that geographical situation, this is another project which is going to interact with existing rights, it is going to interact with, so what you see playing out is this contradiction in some ways. So what in some ways the interaction between the energy transition, which has been largely an emissions and energy debate, with natural resource governance, which is much more grounded, is what we see playing out, and especially for people who are working in law and governance spaces, you see that playing out right now. and where the questions of how do you turn this interaction into, and how do you build in the interaction, two aspects into this interaction much more upfront, and how do you upstream it becomes a question that we are all dealing with, is so that there is an ecological imperative in this whole idea of energy transition, and there is a social process. So it's not like we've decided that this is energy transition, this is good. We don't need to really discuss the good and bad side of things, but so the social process in some ways has happened at maybe international levels, maybe at country government levels, but not where projects are playing out, because there it's a good project, it's coming for you. Yeah. So I'll stop with that.
Thanks, Kanchi. I think that's a nice white canvas. We'll come back to that. Geetam, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. And I would also like to acknowledge first, I had met Girish many times. And in fact, his last visit in Delhi also, I had met him just a day before. So that memory still stays in my mind, and it was so sudden and shocking for all of us. And we all admired his enthusiasm and energy levels of doing work on energy. So let me begin. As I was introduced, that I mostly work on transport sector, and I have been with IIT Delhi for a very long time, mostly looking at transport issues, but the center where I work is an interdisciplinary center, and where the main theme that we have been working on from the beginning is whatever can reduce adverse health effects of transport. So it's about traffic safety, but it's also about air pollution, which is also another negative externality which comes from transport sector, and also what lot of studies are showing now, how lack of active transport means walking and bicycling, lack of that is having huge health impacts globally. It's not just India, and our middle classes are not very different, we are following the same path. So that's the kind of work we've been doing, and then really working closely with city governments, state governments, national governments for almost 25 years, 30 years. Starting by, one of my major interesting project I did was for making bicycle master plan for Delhi. But if you go to Delhi, I don't think any one of you will find it a bicycling city. And we managed to reduce shares, which used to be at one point about 12 to 13%. It's only about 5 to 6% now, but it's not zero. And I remember visiting Pune many times. This was known as bicycle capital of India. And here also we have seen what's been happening over last two decades at least. But coming to this, what is happening today now, energy transition, and you all know that actually transport sector is playing a large role in it. At present, we only talk about 11% of energy consumed, fossil fuel is in transport sector in India, but this is expected to increase. And all the scenarios that, whether it's International Energy Agency or even what Government of India talks about, Niti Aayog, is showing that how our demand of energy in transport sector is going to increase. So I want you to actually think about it, what numbers we have really. And for the first time, 2011 census asked for the first time this question, how do you commute to work? And this commute was non-agricultural activities. And it was a very revealing data, which many of us always suspected, but in small surveys when it's done, it never comes out. It showed that almost 30% people just walk to work. And this is not walking to bus stop or walking to train station, etc. This complete trip is walking trip. Many, almost, if I remember correctly, 15 to 20% also said they don't need to travel at all to go to work. Now this question we haven't understood clearly. What is this response? Is it the work is so close by that they don't consider it as a travel? However, this needs to be explored. And then the second largest, then followed by this, was people using public transport, buses, and then it was motorized two-wheelers, and car was only 5%. Now this was 2011, we still don't have new census, but suppose we make some projections. So 5% may have become 10% now, not more than that, because even car ownership, you look at Delhi, which has the highest number of cars per capita in India, the car trips are only about less than 18% of total trips. And local Delhi surveys also show that about 30 to 32% are walk trips. So why I am mentioning this? Because in all this energy transition debate that we are talking about for transport sector, there is, you have seen there is a major discussion about electrification. Electric cars, electric two-wheelers, and Government of India has had two major schemes for electrifying buses. And of course, metro is being projected as a major clean electric, it is based on electricity public transport system. So first of all, when we focus on this aspect, already we do not have any discussion on about 30 to 40% of the trips. How to retain those trips? That is a major challenge. Okay, now suppose we focus only on the 60% which is motorized transport. So there are two issues here. If we look at public transport, okay, you can list n number of benefits why we have to promote public transport. So it is both buses and metro. How come we don't have enough discussion on improving bus systems nationally? In fact, in last 10 years clearly, we have not had any investment in improving bus systems. Only a little discussion on how to get new buses. But as you will understand that when we talk about transport systems and how we can use the system, it is not about the technology. It is about creating a system. How do I go to a bus stop? What is my experience at the bus stop? What information I have about the bus's arrival? And then finally I travel in a bus. Is it getting stuck in congestion or not? Now with very high two-wheeler ownership in India, and it continues to increase in rural areas also, can I compete my public transport system with the convenience and economics that comes with a two-wheeler? Unless I make that, why should people use public transport or buses? Metro has been in huge demand by every state. I am not sure if it is public demand, because when we try and understand the nature of metro systems, it is excellent for long trips. You have to travel more than 10 kilometers, then metro system becomes very attractive. And if you look at most cities in India, we have high densities, we have mixed land use patterns, formally and informally very often because of many other compulsions. So majority trips happen to be short trips. In Delhi, which one may think it's a big sprawling city, but almost 50% of the trips are less than 5 kilometers. And almost 75% of the trips are less than 10 kilometers. So today in metro, we have 400 kilometers of metro, and we see only with 400 kilometers of metro, 9 to 10% trips are on metro. So we, in this whole debate of investment in improving public transport, the public transport which really needs to be decarbonized to create as a system and ideally an integrated system, that whole debate is not happening. And we seem to be too fascinated with technology. So it's about EVs, it's about different technology of fuel, because you can clean the fuel, you can have hydrogen fuel, you can have bioethanol mixed fuel. It's all, then you are back to car. And there are a lot of health issues which I can also flag. And I think I will close with one last, my concern that eventually when we talk about energy transition, it's not only about low carbon transport. Eventually we are looking at, today we are privy to sustainable development goals. and we have to be very clear that only addressing low carbon transport, how many SDGs are we addressing? So we have SDG 3.6, which says that we have to reduce number of people dying on our roads by 50% by 2030. We have SDG 11.2, which talks about we have to have high quality transport within 500 meters of every citizen. And then we have SDG 11.6, which also talks about air pollution. We have SDG 3.9, which talks about air pollution. So we have to see, we seem to be we have caught up with this whole debate about, first of all, I think not the whole transport system. And even when we talk about only the motorized strips, it tends to only focus on technology and not really how usage is going to be. What will be the consumer experience?
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is, very good. So, yeah. Ashwini, you can go next.
Thanks. First, I would like to thank Girish, because I started working in this field with Girish. He was my colleague. I learned from him, and today I am here, not this evening, but wherever I am in my work is because the way I started working with Girish at that point in time. And it feels a little surreal to sit next to his photo instead of sitting next to him. It's very difficult. To talk about what we've been discussing, I'll start with what your analogy of missing the bus. We work with people who miss the bus, which is not their doing. They did not miss the bus, they just didn't know the bus existed. They didn't know the bus was there and it was going from point A to point B. So our organization works in tribal regions of Nashik, Thane, Palghar, and these are all small and marginal farmers, rain-fed agriculture, so there's no irrigation also, and very little enterprise, so to say, which can absorb people there. So there's a lot of distress migration also. So if we really want to talk about transition, how are we going to provide the kind of well-being and good life that your slides talked about for the people that we are working with? And generally what happens is, when we sit with experts, renewables is considered the best option forward. But then why is it tried only on people who are in tribal areas and living in remote regions? Like solar street lights are not in Pune. They are in some hamlet in Surgana of Nashik district. It's put there. And it then, at some point of time, after a couple of years, it one by one things closed down, because the next part of it, the maintenance part of it, the repairing part of it is not localized. Only the technology reaches there, but if a mobile reaches there, the mobile repairing shop also reaches the cluster. I mean, there's generally one village which has a market and there are few villages around it. So we have to talk about that cluster of villages. And there we have to reach out whenever a technology reaches out with its back end and front end. So when we talk about renewables, let's not talk about renewables for those. Let's talk about, I mean, this is something like mainstream and plan B kind of thing that we see happening in our villages. That said, even when we talk about energy for agriculture, what do we mean by agriculture here? Who? Are we talking about small and marginal farmers? Are we talking about farmers who do not have irrigation, who do not need pumps at all? So their energy use right now is very low because they are not using agriculture implements, any machinery per se, and not being irrigated area, they are not using pumping energy also. So what are we going to think about for these farmers who are in actuality the majority of farmers across India? If you look at rural India, agriculture is still the primary occupation, and rain-fed agriculture, small and marginal farmers are still the majority. So what kind of technology do we have for them now, even before we start talking about transition? That's one of the questions that comes to our people who keep going 40 kilometers away to places like Nifad or Dindori, where you see grapes which are being exported, and you see canal irrigation, you see all kinds of energy being used. So the per capita energy use in agriculture in Nifad and per capita energy use of agriculture in Trambak, which is just 40 kilometers away from each other, is so different. So when we talk about agriculture, we need to consider this diversity and this variation. This is very important. Like for example, we work a lot on Narega, and we have created lot of water storage structures in the villages. We all know that Kharif is their main, like monsoon is the main cropping season. And if there are long dry spells, there is water there, there is a crop there, but I cannot lift that water to save my crop. And with long dry spells, there is something like 25 to 35% of production loss. So here, what is required is a simple protective irrigation technology. Not for the whole year, maybe for 15 to 3 weeks in one season. But we do not have that kind of technology where you can move around the engine, you can move around the pipes, and people can use it collectively, because they do not have the capital resources required to buy one engine for 3 weeks, which can be used only for 3 weeks in a year, right? So these kind of solutions, like we have seen with increase in petrol and diesel prices, that drought power is being used more than what it was couple of years ago. Now can we think of, like we know only Parbhani Krushi Vidyapit which is working on these things, can we think of some hybrid models for small and marginal farmers who have small plots of land and they can use mechanized implements, but which are in hybrid mode? Electricity may or may not be there, diesel is too expensive. So can we think of some hybrid smaller models which are useful on these kind of plots and which are repairable in that, within that cluster? We should have a talent which can repair it within that cluster of villages. So can we think of these things which is meant for a particular group of people which are spread across rural India, and this diversity and this particular group of people is something that we have neglected all these years. So when we are thinking about framework for transition, I think for fair energy transition, I think we need to consider the process design in terms of when we say people's participation, we have to also think about the Panchayat Raj institutions. They cannot be avoided. All discussions cannot take place only in parliament or assemblies. Why not we have discussions in Jilla Parishad, in Panchayat Samiti? Because if a particular project is coming into that geography, it is going to affect a particular community, beneficial or non-beneficial way, it needs to be discussed there too. Discussed not in terms of informing, but discussion in terms of taking decisions. Is it possible? Do we have those kind of mechanisms? Not yet. But we can be on that path. It's not too difficult. So I would like to flag these issues.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, as you would have noticed, the people have spoken about issues and what should be done, what should not be done, which is good. But I think because they are actually on the field doing many things. So I will just, change my, initial plan of the round 2. For one reason, I think we will keep this round 2 a little shorter just to keep time. So my suggestion about round 2 is that perhaps I will give one idea, which now, because now I understood what all of you are doing, I will give one idea which you would know very closely, and you could just tell perhaps how that could be done better. That would be my suggestion. So I will again, start with Kanchi. Kanchi very correctly said that there is a goal of clean energy and so many things, but ultimately what matters is the project at the local level. For everyone, it's the people community, it's a project. So my question to her would be, any of these projects, how they could be done better, in our country, or since we know that she's involved in network which work in many other countries. Has she some experience of a project being done, much better somewhere else? That will be a nice thing to understand.
So I've got my googly. All this doesn't matter, all the preparation. But I think one of the things that that has even, I would just want to emphasize is that I think once we bring in this people-centric idea into the energy transition, it has already complicated the matter. And the moment we complicate the matter, you have been in other kinds of conversations where the response that you get is, how much can you stretch the idea of energy transition? If you stretch it too much, energy transition won't happen. So this is really a chasm between the climate change conversations as well as the local governance conversations. And I think one of the most critical things for us to do is to recognize that. If we don't recognize that energy transition has to be a social project, it has to be an ecological project, unless and until that recognition happens, we will not even be able to put in place processes where these are upstreamed at the policy level and downstreamed at, and we have actually mechanisms and processes in place where we just don't assume these are good projects, so let it go. Let's actually not, there are procedural environmental rights that we can put in place, like public participation, transparency, accountability for specific projects. So let's not over subsidize those processes and get them out of the picture. And at the policy level, when we are really figuring out models and mechanisms and technologies of what can be deployed where and what should be the mix, it should talk about the social question, it should talk about the ecological question, and only then we will get into the practice of being able to take these further. Otherwise, we will constantly be come with a question saying, okay, we understand these are all very important issues, but we've already built the bus and we've already gone many miles ahead. So if you don't have a seat on the bus, it's okay. Let us figure it out, because if the bus is too crowded, how do we handle it? So what I'm trying to say is, questions of democracy, questions of social accountability, questions of ecological sustainability, the non-human, which complicate the debates, have to be acknowledged. I am not saying we will not have trade-offs. There will need to be trade-offs, but for trade-offs also you need to actually acknowledge that these are important. Yes. These are important. So you have to, in urban areas, when you are building projects, you have to figure out there are going to be trees on the way. There are going to be those things. These are not, as I was saying earlier, these are not empty spaces. When you are pulling something down, it's going to be difficult to breathe. Where will all that construction and demolition waste go? Or for that matter, when you are closing down or transitioning from fossil fuels, what's going to happen to the labor? So some of those questions are beginning to come, but they are on the side, on the margins still. They are not core questions. The core thing is the emissions transition should happen. The technological transition should happen.
Yeah, so I understand that, yes. So, yeah, that is why things are not going well, but still you don't want to venture to say where something goes well or that is too tough, nothing.
No, I think what I was basically trying to say is that we have to bring in processes.
Yeah.
I think this is not a done deal. So these processes have to be there to be able to open up these questions. We should not have resistance, whether we are people from the social side, whether from the technological side or finance side. Let's open it up. Yeah? The conversation can lead to some kind of solutions, and even if you let go of your position, you at least feel that you were part of that decision. Yeah. So I still feel that being part of the decision is as important as not having your decision, or having your decision to be, or your position to be accepted. I should have the choice to let go of my position, not somebody else telling me. So I think that is what I am trying to say, and I think some of these national and international processes where these debates have happened, say with there have been models of access and benefit sharing where communities have been brought on the table, at least representatives, and it's been debated for 2-3 years. Now, that's, as I said, if I complicate it, I am going to be told, well, you can't wait, because
you are against even against a good transition.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I have a.
Please.
I want to actually highlight something that you have already said. you know, in very often we come across this argument कि this is the difference between India and China. We have been taking too long to make decisions, and look, China is going so fast. But now in 21st century, should we not be looking at the greater environmental costs? At what cost that development is happening? So I think we have to go back to what you said, democratic processes. We cannot do away with that.
That's right. I think that is a common theme, I think, with
Yeah.
all of us are agreeing. Yeah. So now what I would like to ask you, and maybe I can give you an option. One option is, you talked quite a bit about people's transport, and it was a very nice, illuminating kind of thing. Similarly, if you can talk a little about goods transport, that is one option I can give you. A second option, if you can take, is you correctly told the importance of non-motorized transport and public transport, which should happen, and which we can see in front of our eyes is not happening. So, like I asked Kanchi, if you want to tell a example where it happened nicely, that also will be a good thing, in somewhere in the world where it happened well. So you can choose.
That's your googly.
Yeah, I think I will choose passenger transport.
Goods.
Because actually goods transport is just one line on goods transport. So you know that in almost in 1960s up to end of beginning of 70s, a large portion of our goods was being transported by train, which is much more efficient way of transporting. And now we find the trend has almost completely reversed. But one of the issues there is that again, how much we have invested in road versus trains. Now we are working on dedicated freight corridors. Otherwise, freight on a regular train schedule was always given the last priority, and in fact even today, because DFC is still not operating, it is basically when you want to send something, you will get only like a window of time that when your goods will reach, because they don't have any fixed schedule whenever the line is available. But hopefully this is being solved. But the second bigger issue is also that for electrification of freight vehicles, at the moment we don't have any good solutions, because the battery size is too large, and even globally people are working on it, but at the moment there doesn't seem to be good solution. So that remains a big question mark. And we go back to train, but the train, then how do you work out the last mile connectivity? And that is one of the reasons that value added goods continue to be transported by road, because in train that last mile connectivity doesn't exist right now. But now to touch more the subject more close to my heart, passenger transport. And so something, we all have talked about processes. And if you look at, so we are clear that both for non-motorized transport, we have to do it. And then, I did not mention the health benefits. Some of you may already know there are large number of studies which relate prevalence of cerebrovascular diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all to lack of active transport. And also studies make it very clear that going to gym is not the same thing as walking normally. And you think of it because through evolutionary processes, we have evolved for walking speeds. So unless we do that WHO recommendation of 10,000 steps every day, actually there are a large body of scientific evidence linking to all kinds of things. So now it is not about telling people please walk. I think it is about what indication we give on the roads. How are we designing our infrastructure? And I think one simple example I want to give, very often we know that pedestrian crossing of roads is becoming more and more difficult, and when you raise this issue, Public Works Department is very quick to make a foot over bridge. And then they come back and say, yeah, we made foot over bridge, but nobody is using it. So you think of it at two levels. Why? First, I think we are giving clear indication that if you want to walk, you will have to go up and down. The right of way belongs to car. And if you want convenience, please buy a car. And then there are studies which show that every 1 meter of vertical distance in terms of our own energy consumption is equivalent to walking 20 to 25 meters of horizontal distance. So when we are asking someone to climb up 6 meters to cross the road, it is really telling that person, you walk 120 meters and then cross the road. This is completely counterintuitive. Why should people do it? Yeah. So these are little things that we have to really watch out how we are designing our infrastructure. Always I have seen so many cities where we have been working closely is that when everybody is so bothered with car congestion, that seems to be a prime focus. How to ensure that cars do not get stuck in congestion. But for me, fortunately and maybe unfortunately for other people, they are always stuck in congestion. So I think we have to suffer more congestion to really still move and decide that yes, we have to do things differently. Because we are always seeing, we are so quick to reduce pedestrian path. Why do we need 2 meters? Make it less and increase the space for cars. So this is one thing that we really have to struggle. And then coming back to, I wanted to flag another important issue that public transport has to compete with two-wheelers. In India, motorization is because of two-wheelers. It's not because of cars. And this would continue for next 20-30 years. Because in 2040 also, what is a per capita income going to be? Less than 10,000 USD. Even today, it is about 2,000. And if you say PPP also, it is about only 4,000. So, this whole fascination of car, you can imagine that what kind of democracy are we talking about? So, two-wheelers now, we see very fast electrification of two-wheelers. Now, two-wheelers become clean, they are very inexpensive, they don't require parking space, they can weave through the traffic and beat congestion. Why should people use public transport? But what does two-wheeler come with? You must have seen the numbers in the newspapers. Today we have about 155,000 people dying on our roads, which is an underestimate. WHO's numbers are close to 220,000 per year. And about 30% of that is two-wheelers. No matter what we do, even with helmets, two-wheeler remains a high-risk mode. So we will meet our low-carbon goals, but we will end up killing more people on the roads. So there is clear conflict of SDG 3.6 with 11.6. So I think if we have to move together, we have to see very carefully, there are synergies, and that is where we have to focus on. And we have to clearly identify where the conflicts are coming, and this is not the transition pathway that we should be working on.
Yeah, thanks. So before I ask Ashwini, I just want to remind people that questions should be asked to the volunteers or through the chat box. So Ashwini, you can have your response, then we'll start the question answer session. What do you think? So what I want to ask you is that I think now all of us have said the importance of governance at local level. That is something that you very much relate to. So what I would like to you to reply would be any of these projects which are supposed to be energy transition, how it is getting implemented in the areas that you work. It could be LPG for cooking, or that there is a lot of talk about electric cooking, in a big way, starting electric cooking in a big way all over the country. So any of these things, what are your perceptions? What will happen? What may happen? And how, if at all, it is to be implemented, how it should be implemented?
Yeah, see, with LPG cooking, what we have seen is that government, especially forest department in our area, really pushed it in a big way, because they thought this will reduce the use of firewood and then reduce the dependence on forest, and they can save forest this way. But this is like, forest never got destroyed because of firewood, and firewood is branches, not trees. Anyway, I mean, we start with misconceptions and then answer goes haywire. But LPG stoves came in a big way. We actually saw government officers going into villages, holding meetings and requesting people, households, families to adopt LPG stoves, and also the subsidy that mattered. Now this was few years ago, and then we saw a lot of hoardings saying that now women in rural areas are using LPG stoves and how that is helping them, so clean energy, and which is definitely true, because instead of sitting in front of a chula, sitting in front of LPG stove is health wise, individually health wise much better. But the point is, there were a couple of things. Training matters a lot. The elderly women were wary of using it. They were not sure how to use it and they were scared. But the younger ones who had been to school and things like that, they were ready to adopt and they did use it. But ultimately LPG stoves got used for tea, milk, at the most vegetables, but never for bhakri, because that you have to go back to chula. So so it was never LPG stove I have not seen being replaced by chula. It is the second option to chula. Chula always gets used because my labor is cheaper still, and I can always go and find firewood and use chula, because if we have to compare this, instead of going for firewood, can I use that same time to go and work somewhere and earn more than what the cost of firewood is? That's the simple economics which people have played out, and so LPG stove has always remained secondary. Now the next, okay, initially all this happened, but then there was no distribution supply system there. That did come into place over a period of time. Now that all that is in place, it has become so expensive and the subsidy is just not coming in. Nobody is discussing about subsidy. Subsidy unofficially looks like it has stopped, but we are not discussing it. It's not getting highlighted anywhere. All those posters are gone. So it has now virtually not being used because it is too expensive. 1100 rupees for a couple of months gives me equivalent 1100 rupees firewood if I buy for more months and for all cooking, right, and inclusion of heating water for bath and whatever, right. So the individual household level economics doesn't fit in, even if you want to reduce the carbon footprint or whatever, right. That's one point. With electric stove, we have just started one small experiment with Yale University, and we have distributed free of cost cooking this induction cook stoves to few families. There is a reluctance. Again, the kind of food that we want to cook is not conducive to using those cook stoves. You need to use particular type of vessels for that. So again, it is got reduced to tea and milk and these kind of things. Moreover, the electricity consumption and its rates go into a higher slab after you start using the electric stove. That's at the individual level. But one of the what do we call the distribution center, one of the engineers there said that if you distribute it like this, we can't take that load. If everybody starts, because everybody is going to cook at the same time. So if everybody in that particular village, and if you have distributed, let's say 25 or 50 induction stoves in that area, and if everybody starts using it at the same time, our distribution network cannot take that load. It is not designed for that. So, I mean, how do we decide that rural India should start using either LPG stoves or induction stoves? We have had several versions of improved chulas. We have tried all that. So, we still don't have a universal answer. So, we need to look at again geographies and communities, and then find ways of looking for cooking fuel in that area, how to keep it more and more clean, and also adapt to what people want. So did we ever have any dialogue with women in the villages to find out what kind of cooking fuel suits them and what are they comfortable with, what are their needs. One particular cook stove, I am told, has little bit of a fan and a battery in it. It's private company which is going into villages and selling it, and it's getting adapted. Same chula, but it has a fan and a battery to it, right? So maybe we need to study that. Whether the solution comes from market or government, point is it has to be suitable for the person who is going to use it. Because if we see Unilever Foundation will, Unilever companies and all will never sell a product which doesn't get sold. They will not continue manufacturing it if it is not getting sold. So similarly, this feedback mechanism for any government policy, for any government service, for any government product, where is that feedback mechanism when the user tells you that this works, this doesn't work, this works in a particular situation, this doesn't work in a particular situation. This kind of feedback is necessary to improve where we are and cater to cooking fuel.
Yeah, thanks Ashwini. So, I'm happy that one of the common thread that has always come is that whatever transition, or actually in that sense anything that we plan should not be planned from the top. There is a lot of need to keep these kind of inputs, then only anything will work, and that at all levels, that is, I think that is the common thread that is going. Of course, you need a system, at a system level study, like whatever Geetam said, that kind of information is also needed. But I mean, I don't know how much of such inputs also go into the policy making. That's also an unfortunate thing, but that is what we need to try to do. So I will, there are a lot of questions that have been given to me. So these questions are, some of them are to specific, some of them are to general. So I will try to ask one by one. One of them is to you, Geetam. You were saying that, cycling is a good thing to do if there is a, good it is exercise and so on and so forth. But doesn't it also lead to higher road accidents? That's the question. If people cycle, will it not also increase the number of accidents?
No, I think the reason we have accidents because we don't design cycle-friendly cities. It's nothing to do with cyclists, and actually designing a cycle-friendly city is not difficult. Only on main roads, arterial roads where the speeds are 50 kilometers, we need to have a separate track, and which is in bigger cities about 25% of your total road network. Remaining 75%, just by ensuring 30 kilometer per hour speed, and we have lot of designs for that, it is mixed traffic and it becomes cycle friendly. So the complete city network one can achieve by combining these two strategies. So cycling, actually more people cycling will lead to, I would say, fewer crashes, because if a pedestrian is hit by cyclists, the chances of fatality is rather low.
That is true. Yeah, I think that answers the question. They don't lead to accidents and fatalities. Okay, the next question is something that any of you can answer. See, whatever I just concluded, that basically our policies should be driven by at the top level a good informed techno-economic people-centric process that should be driving it. That on that we all agree. But the question is, it doesn't seem to happen in the way it should happen. In fact, many of our organizations are trying to make that happen. So the question that is asked, how do you really make that happen? In both ways. One is to how does this kind of involvement at the policy level take inputs from the people? How do we do it? Like suppose we are the people who are working on a policy, how do we collect those inputs from the people, and how do we sort of work at the top level of policy making so that ultimately it gets introduced, because you all said that is what should be done, but then how it should be done, if you have anything from your experience, that will be good to know. So whoever is ready can go first.
I mean, I think with the energy transition question, I think I would emphasize that this is still a very new debate. I think the energy transition idea was so set earlier in the policy levels, and certain kind of areas were clearly defined that this is what is going to take us further. I genuinely feel, even if we want to, I mean, of course there is no what do you say, Brahmastra for this at all, but I think if we are starting with more and more people who are actually have been working on energy transition at national and international levels, bring in these discussions into those corridors and bring in people and the conversations that we've been having into those corridors, I think that's, in some ways this has been a really, this gap has to be bridged. Only then we can even think of that there is going to be a political buy-in for something like this. If largely it's been a conversation about technology and finance, social and ecological have not been part of it. I mean, we have to first say that yes, it's important, it's not a peripheral issue that we can fix later on. Firstly, I think those white papers, those policy papers and all of those things have to actually say that this has to happen. Then have the kind of, having a diversity in the seat on the table to say, well, I have this persuasion, what you are saying it will not work eventually. Actually, when you are saying something will come to my village or my neighborhood, it actually does not come. There are practical aspects. So your modeling might work, but it does not make sense to me. So that diversity is the starting point, I think, for even trying to make this happen. Eventually, where it will go is a bigger political, geopolitical question, and I think we just have to keep hitting it. But I just wanted to once again emphasize that the energy transition debate has to be grounded. It has to be grounded. Otherwise, we're going to be hitting these roadblocks, and it almost like hits the legitimacy of the idea of the energy transition. We don't want that to get delegitimized in this process.
I would like to just add one point to this, is that first de-jargonize all that. I mean, it has become so techno whatever expert. I don't understand half of the articles that I read on climate change and carbon whatever. How do I go and talk about it in Gram Sabha? So my point is, because I'll give one parallel example. We could do this with water. Groundwater, surface water, irrigation, non-irrigation, watershed management, the kind aquifer management, participatory water management. In all these things, we could democratize technology as well as processes to a large extent, right? It took decades. It didn't happen in 2 years. I mean, we've been doing it since 80s, and now we know that we can go into villages and we can discuss water related issues, right? Because it got de-jargonized. We are not talking about aquifer. We don't use the word aquifer, but we talk about aquifer in villages, right? So this bridge needs to be built between the expertise and between the people who are users or implementers or who are going to maintain whatever. Where is that bridge?
Yeah, very valid point. Yes, you want.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight that in transport sector, I think the whole debate has been hijacked by car companies, manufacturers and technologists. So Mercedes can have really a big event on sustainable mobility, and where they show big nice picture and they show their most modern top of the line electric vehicle, and they have something about I think the picture I remember, this event was done in Delhi. There is nothing to do with walking, nothing to do with public transport. It's just all about top of the line electric vehicle. You buy this electric vehicle, the range is becoming 500 kilometers, the problem is solved. So I think we really have to, and for me the solution is that we cannot leave it only to manufacturers and these big technology companies. That is where the whole thing has been hijacked, and we have to bring more social scientists and people who really work with people to start debating about the kind of mobility which is required in future.
Right. Agree. Okay, Kanchi, there is one question to you, that you said that there is a lot of compromise on all this environmental oversight because some of the projects are considered good. So the question is that if you would really increase those due diligence on ecological things, it will come at the scale of it will come at the expense of scaling up renewable projects which are needed for energy transition. So won't that be a problem?
Scaling up, I mean,
if more and more, if you say that do like you have to do very careful and environmental and socio-economic impact study of renewable energy projects, they won't come up at the speed that they should be coming up. But as per the government plans, we have to get 500 gigawatts by this much time. So a lot of the renewable energy capacity speed has to increase a lot.
No, see, I think that is the inherent contradiction that I am talking about from the very beginning. If we don't take some of these things into account upfront at prior project level, they automatically hit you during and after project is built. So it's good, there is delays, whether you do it take into account beforehand or sometime in the middle or later on, it's going to happen, and you see that really playing out project after project after project. And I think it becomes extremely crucial because the entire discussions on renewables has moved away from things like rooftop solar and decentralized energy to large infrastructure. And when there is large infrastructure, it is necessarily large social and ecological footprint. Now, if there is a large social and ecological footprint, we have to, at a governance level, decide at what stage you will be able to deal with those conflicting questions. Do you convince people beforehand? Do you take into account the non-human beforehand, or the brakes are hit when when you have a transmission tower coming up and something hits it, a bird comes and hits it, and there's a hullabaloo about it. So it's or for that matter, somebody when you're going into an area and there is a land acquisition question, your project is hit that question at a later stage. So the time is going to be taken. Now whether we want to take it up as a question beforehand to address or be taken by surprise later on, it's a different matter. I think I just feel that this speed versus quality thing is a big it will continue to be as big a debate as environment versus development, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, correct. Now there is another question which is a little different. In Srihari's presentation, he said that one of the things that is driving transition is increasing demand. So the question is that how do we bring a consumption reduction in our energy transition framework, or should we bring so how we should bring a reduction in this framework? Maybe even when because of all supply capacity addition in electricity is happening in renewable energy, and as he said, we are electrifying the economy. So in all those things, should consumption reduction be a focus, let's say in the Indian context, and if so, how that should be done? I mean, any one of you can answer, or all of you can answer.
I have some numbers for it. So yeah, that is what I had just noted down, that energy demand is going to increase because transport demand in transport sector, because we'll have more people and more people traveling, so that's obvious. But the choice is, we could increase by 100% or we could increase by 500%. And this difference between 100 and 500% is very crucial, because then all the negative externalities also get related to that. So 100%, 500% would happen if we continue our technology-centric pathway. Really big focus on EVs and hydrogen and clean blue energy, green energy, etc., whichever color you choose. But if we go for the other people-centric system approach, then the increase could be curtailed up to 100% increase only. And that is really bringing back to walking, bicycling and reasonable public transport. But that investment and effort has to come from the government. We don't expect individuals to buy buses and make sure that there is a nice bus stop and that the bus doesn't get stuck in congestion. This is all government investment. So that has to come.
May I add one thing to that? 15 years back, there were like one bus in the morning and one bus in the evening from state transport into the villages. It is still the same. But in the meantime, we have had dozens of these 10-seaters, which carry more than 25 people, right? Which are plying on the same routes 4 or 5 times a day. So why haven't we increased the frequency of the ST buses or have smaller buses and shorter routes? We don't have to take the whole 50, 60, 80 kilometer route and then come back in the evening. Instead, we can have smaller buses, shorter routes by the government. Absolutely. Instead of these so unsafe
So there is demand
private.
for it clearly.
There is a demand. We see at least 5. And especially on the days when you have bazaar days, there are like 25 or so trips that happen
So
in a day.
one quick something I would add here, that there has been a lot of discussion on how all state transport undertakings are loss-making undertaking. But globally, no public transport system recovers from money from fare box. You have to, because you have to look at social benefits. It is not to be run as a business. It is a social service like supplying clean water. And so that is one big debate, but the fascinating aspect I find is every metro system in the country is running in loss. Delhi Metro is not able to pay back the loans now because that period is over and they have to pay back the loans. They are coming back to the government asking for help. So that is kind of not considered too bad. But how come for buses we don't want to do that? We don't even want to increase one more bus on that route.
Yeah.
So I think this is stepmotherly treatment.
Okay.
It's not fancy technology.
Okay, similarly there is a question from a different point of view that there is a lot of talk about climate impact on all people, urban and rural. So in this whole transition debate, how important is climate adaptation? Because all these things we are talking is about mitigation. What should be the focus on climate adaptation, and if so, what is the, let's say, a people-centric, like the way she said, people-centric systems approach to a climate adaptation?
I think it's a huge question, and I think it's a big question that is in the last climate talks. You saw the whole debate on loss and damage that came up, which was basically people who are communities and countries that are most impacted by climate change have raised the issue about being compensated for all the damage that is taking place because of the actions that have been taking place earlier. So adaptation actually is a huge area of work. It's an urgent area of work, whether it is the coastal spaces where sea erosion is happening, whether it's the kind of climate disasters in the Himalayas. I think huge attention needs to be taken. It's not happening because, I genuinely feel there isn't, financing is not being put into it, and it's also not seen as a project that will bring in the money. It's like, those are areas of true blue governance where governments nationally, internationally in global processes have to invest much more time, energy into recognizing that these are vulnerable spaces, and these are actually very crucial questions. And I think whether it's indigenous communities, whether it's island states, these are big questions that are being asked even globally. So I think there's no either or, because those are, places are disappearing, climate disasters are just increasing. So we have to have outlays in our budgets for disaster mitigation. Just recognize that this is going to happen, preparedness has to take place. So I think, it's the need of the hour.
Yeah. Anyone else want to respond to this adaptation question?
So I'll just highlight a couple of things in transport sector that we are very poorly equipped to deal with this, because we are experiencing extreme heat and extreme rainfall, and we see how our cities become completely standstill, nothing moves, and we end up getting into this very difficult situation of public transport not able to, so there is no resilience in our public transport. And something that some groups have already started studying, that especially for people walking, and the data shows that more women walk to work as compared to men, and in extreme heat conditions they get affected. So it is also about gender equity. The census data also shows that more women use public transport as compared to men, and our public transport systems are completely unprepared to deal with any. You've seen every time there is a big rainfall what happens to bus systems, and metro also has to shut down because you can't get to a metro. So yes, this resilience is very important adaptation part, and we really need to work urgently, as you said, on it.
Flooding, urban flooding, air
Yeah.
pollution are as much mitigation questions as there are adaptation questions. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next question, the person has said it is marked to Ashwini, but anyone can answer. In all the presentations, in Srihari's presentation also, when he talked about renewable or energy generation options, he was talking largely about solar and wind. But biomass is also a source not only for electricity, but even for fuels and use in transport and all those things. We didn't really cover that area. But the question is that compared to West, India has that option of using agricultural resources to transition to a modern society. So what is the opinion? Do you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, it has worked in the sense that a friend of ours has put up biogas systems on pilot basis in couple of villages, and it is working pretty fine. But again, it is like the LPG stove, right? So the kind of food that you can make there has its own limitations. Otherwise, they get slurry, so it can work with the new technology that they have. So the earlier technology that demanded a lot of digging up and that huge balloons and all that is now being replaced by smaller and more simpler technology. So that can work. Again, this is a private initiative, so unless government comes in, and it can't get too far.
Thank you. See, another very interesting question is that maybe you could answer. Lot of discussion on transport, that is people's transport that we discussed was related to, let's say, big cities, and there a lot of problems are there in which you elaborated. So if you want to improve things, is it going to be easier to do it in smaller towns and like peri-urban kind of a thing? Do you think it will work better, and is there a possibility, and is there any such focus happening in those kind of areas?
Yeah, small city I think is very important, because if you really look at our numbers, almost 28 to 30% of our urban population lives in these small cities by Indian standards, less than 5 lakhs. So we actually did some work for last 6 years. We picked up 2-3 small cities and we tried to understand. So first thing was that there is no good quality data, but then we were able to generate data using all public sources, census, Google, satellite images, and also showing the public administration how even for safety you can extract from police reports relevant information, and we just put up very low cost air pollution devices to check what the air pollution levels were. So then next question was, then in the next phase we said how we can start actually dealing with some of it. Let's see how we can meet SDG targets. So we did all the calculations, we made detailed plans after a lot of public participation, public exhibitions, and with administration. So we must have had like almost 20 workshops in each city. We picked up a corridor, let's see simple things how it can be done. And that is where the major roadblock came. because so two things after this detailed exercise we understood. Once the current governance and institutional system is such that a good administrator told us, whatever you have to do it in 6 months because I will be transferred after this. And she was really good, she was very keen, she understood what we were discussing, but she did get transferred and we had to deal with 2-3 other district magistrates. So who is talking, who is responsible in a city for this long term vision? Many of things that we are talking about will not happen in 6 months. Who is responsible for it? Why should they be interested in it? Then even the public works department that we started working very closely to do simple changes on the road, and it showed that first of all it needed lot of hand holding, and then they said ki this is not part of a regular maintenance budget. So they told us, if you can make sure that this making these small paintings and traffic calming devices becomes part of our maintenance budget, then we will be able to do it regularly on our own. So some processes need to be changed. Then we looked at master plan. In the master plan, in theory, they say there should be public participation, etc. But we know how weak that is. But there was no section which talks about long-term vision for mobility, SDGs, nothing. So we tried to insert that, but we don't know where it will go. So after working for almost 6 years in these 2-3 small cities, Bulandshahr, which is just close to Delhi, and we found that air pollution levels were worse than Delhi. And a major highway passes through the city. So there is no speed control there. And all your new so-called black spots where people are dying are close to this. So we have Grab for Delhi. We have so much discussion in Delhi, Mumbai, maybe Kolkata, in the major cities. But the cities where 30-40% of our population is living, people are not working, there is no information and there is no discussion about it. So we are really, I think, we are kind of, and from places like Delhi, we are saying, okay, we'll make one more ring road, traffic need not come here, but where will it? Air pollution doesn't have any city boundaries, yeah. There are air sheds which are very different. So there is lot of work needs to be done in small cities, but in the current, there is major deficiency in our governance structure, and a lot of effort is really required to build this bottom up.
Thank you. I think we will not be able to take too many more questions. I will just ask one final question and then we'll go to the final round. So this perhaps Ashwini you could answer. You said there is a lot of need to discuss at the local level, and you said there is a lot of need to dejargonize, which is very well taken. But the question is that whatever, let's say, non-democratic practices and problems that are there at top level are also present at local level. So how do you think, is it easier to overcome them and manage them, and how do you do that? That's a question.
Yeah, but if we are ready to accept it at the top level, then why not accept it at the lower level also?
We accept, right? But you have to change, right?
Yeah, of course. So the processes or the ways in which we work at the decision making level, and especially in the power corridors, it's complex, has its limitations. But something comes out of it, good, bad, a mix of that, and we go ahead. Same thing will happen in each Gram Sabha. Good, bad, both things will happen. There will be different parties there. There will be pull and push. That's democracy. Good and bad things will happen there too. That will be a mix. Let us not have a very romantic understanding of villages that बहुत बढ़िया हो जाएगा once there is a discussion. Not necessarily. There are elites there. There will be elite capture there too. But let it go through its own learning curve. Why not? Why are we so hesitant to have confidence in our own people when they are in the villages, but we have confidence in people who are walking in the parliament corridors? Both of them are people, that's it. And similar or plus or minus wisdom. So more than technology, it is the relevance, it is the maturity, and it is the wisdom that matters. And let us try to build that as democracy. All of us need to build that.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I'll just, there are so many questions, but we'll stop for want of time. So I'll just have a very quick last round where you maybe 1 or 2 sentences where you would like to say anything in your condensed way, if you want to. So maybe I'll start with Kanchi because you missed some few questions for some time. So I'll start with you.
I think we, I'm not sure if I have anything more to add than what I have already spoken about, but I think I basically just wanted to highlight that these kinds of conversations are the spaces where we are even beginning to acknowledge certain issues. And I think more and more, if we continue to have whether it's in specific areas of this transition debate or an overview sort of discussions, I think the diverse actors sitting together and figuring out, okay, do you have a space in this discussion or do I want to step back? That's fine. I think if the more we do that, it will not just help us deal with the complexities, it will also popularize this whole question. So de-jargonize, popularize. It's something that is on everybody's mind as an important thing to deal with. So while I'm dealing with my everyday commute to the office, I also have something like this in mind while I'm making the choices. It's not going to be easy, and it's definitely not easy when you see the mandate of governments going completely different from what your individual choices are. But I don't see there being any other choice but to just keep banging at the door and saying, this is it, this is it, this is it. And the more bangs there are, the more sounds of those bangs there are, I think it may work.
Thanks. You would like to go?
Yeah, I think I just would like to close with that. We have to democratize energy transition in mobility, and we have to bring back, or we have to really focus on vulnerable groups. Look at children, women and old people. If that works for them, it works for everyone.
Right.
What I understand is that see, there are big questions, and they are articulated in a particular way. So if the big question gets articulated in a very big way, then it remains there at the top. So how do we unbundle, unfold the same problem and try and re-articulate it or refashion it to particular geographies and particular communities? Can we have the same question but re-articulated for a particular community, for a particular geography, and then maybe we can find different answers in different places. We need not look for one big articulated question and one big universal answer. This itself needs to be questioned, I think, and we need to decentralize. Though we know that the question is universal, the answers can be decentralized. And can we go towards that? This is too complex. And as a society, I think we do not give enough value to the process of coordination, bringing about discussions. It's so difficult to facilitate discussions. We have to acknowledge this. We have to have those skills to facilitate discussions. Like she said, we have to accept that I can say something, it will not be accepted, but finally I will accept whatever the whole community has decided, and I will live with it. So all this, this journey needs to be done, and we cannot shy away from that. It is too complex, it's definitely not simple, but we can't shy away from it.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. I think I don't have much work to do except say that it was a wonderful discussion which we managed, I think reasonably well. Maybe perhaps we had this is not just this 1 hour, we have been talking to each other, and that has helped. But even then, the key point that I take is a system level approach, a long term approach which focuses on the vulnerable people most, because they are the people who get left out of the bus, and if their needs are met, majority of the society's needs are met. That should be the kind of thing. And I'll just end this note by saying that we should continue this kind of conversation with multiple people at multiple levels and at different kind of geographies, and I think that's the only way to arrive at multiple solutions. There is no one solution. So thanks a lot for this.
Thank you.
I will just request Vijaya to come and propose a vote of thanks.
So I totally agree with Kanchi. This kind of conversation needs to happen because this will help to create the discourse about the topic. And thank you very much, all of you. So my name is Vijaya. I'm from Prayas Health Group. I am here today to give a vote of thanks. And I would like to thank you, all of you panelists. It was a very thought-provoking and wonderful discussion we had today. And would like to thank you, Ashwini Kulkarni. She all the way came away here to Pune. She's from Pragati Abhiyan Nashik. And I would like to thank you, Geetam and Kanchi. Both of them came from Delhi. Geetam is from IIT Delhi and Kanchi is from Center Policy for Research, New Delhi. Thank you, all three of you, for your wonderful and very nice discussion we had today. I would also like to thank you, Naren. He also presented today in this discussion, and I would also like to thank you, Sri Kumar, for moderating the discussion. It was well moderated. I wanted to announce that a recording of this today's discussion will be available in next week, and one can access it from Prayas website. I would like to thank you, Sri Hari, for introductory presentation on GSM. And lastly, I would very grateful for administration of Navalmal Firodia Auditorium for making this hall available. And also like to thank you, Aditya Modak, who is behind the camera and who is shooting this event today. Thank you again for all of you who attended this event today. Thank you very much.